Hi everybody, my name is Anis Matunga, aka Dr. Ghost, and today we're going to be looking at the anatomy of the vertebrae column. So let's get into it. So the vertebrae column is different in children and in adults because we have bones like the sacrum that fuses to become one in adults, and the coccyx fuses to become one bone in adults as well. But in children, these are individual vertebrae bones. So in children, it becomes 33. And these are the cervical C1 to C7, thoracic T1 to T12, lumbar L1 to L5, and sacrum becomes S1 to S5. Then coccyx, as I said, has either 3 or 4 bones, right? But in adults, it becomes 26 bones because it's cervical C1 to C7, thoracic T1 to T12, lumbar L1 to L5, one sacrum bone, and one coccyx bone because it's fused together to become one huge bone. The vertebrae column is not straight, as you can see. It's got inward and outward curvatures, and the outward curvatures are primary curvatures and they result from embryonic development. These are the curvatures that are found during baby's development and when the baby is born. But as the child grows and becomes older, the secondary curvatures are now formed. And these are the cervical and the lumbar curvatures. Then the primary curvatures are the thoracic and sacral curvatures. So basically, the importance of these curvatures is that they help in posture, they help in shock absorption and balance, and they also keep the head level. So you'll find that in conditions like scoliosis, kyphosis, or lordosis, the curvatures are altered in a way, and this affects the person's posture and the person's ability to balance, etc., etc. It affects a lot of things. So you find either one, especially in scoliosis, one side of the body will be higher than the other because the curvatures have been altered. So if you alter the shape of the curvatures in any way, it affects the absorption of shock, the position of the head, and the balance. Between the vertebrae bones, we have the intervertebral disc. And these intervertebral discs have a jelly-like pad between the vertebrae bodies. And we have what we call the nucleus pulposus, which is the jelly-like substance at the center. And surrounding the nucleus pulposus is the nucleus fibrosus. So you can actually see the fibrous layer that is around the blue part, which is the nucleus pulposus. And their function is basically shock absorption, right? And allows slight movement between the vertebral bones without actually causing any friction. So they're really essential because any alteration or anything that affects these, like disc herniation, which is where the annular fibrosus is weak or it tears, and this makes the nuclear pulposus, which is the inner jelly-like substance that I told you about, squeeze out, and it squeezes out and leaks into the spinal nerve, and this actually affects the spinal cord or the spinal nerves. This causes stress when bending, lifting anything, or sitting poorly. It also creates an overload because there's now stress with the vertebrae bones, and it also causes degeneration of the disc and also cracking of the bones. It's most common with the lumbar and the cervical bones, and less common with the thoracic because the thoracic has got the rib cage to stabilizing that region, so it's really happening in the thoracic region of the vertebrae bone. So right now, let's take a look at the general structure of the bones in every region. So let's start with the cervical. So in terms of size, the cervical vertebrae bones are generally smaller, and their shape is small and rectangular vertebrae bodies. And then they have a spinous process that is bifid or split a bit. Then their main job is to support the head, and they are highly mobile. And their unique role is they have a transverse foramen that protects the vertebral artery. You understand? The general structure of the thoracic vertebrae bone is that it is medium size and it has a heart-shaped vertebrae body which has a rib facets. It has a long transverse process that points downwards sharply, and the unique feature on them is the costal facets, which is where the attachment of the ribs are, which is found on their vertebrae bodies. And yeah, that's basically it about the thoracic vertebrae. And then lastly, the lumbar vertebrae. The lumbar vertebrae are the lowest on the back. They're large, okay, and they're more solid. They have a large kidney-shaped vertebrae body. Their spinous process is short, blunt, and square. They bear the weight and they're less mobile. So now we're going to focus on the last two regions of the vertebrate column, which is the sacrum region and the coccygeal region. The sacrum, it is made of 5 fused bones in adults, but they're not fused in children, as mentioned before. And these bones are considered large and triangular in shape. Their role is basically to transfer weight to the pelvis and the legs. What's so unique about them is that the nerves actually pass through their sacral foramen, yeah? For the coccyx, there are 4 fused typical bones. They're small hooks and triangle in shape. They're usually for muscle and ligamental attachments. They do not have any foramen whatsoever, and they are nicknamed or called the tailbone. Now that we're done with the general structure of the vertebrate bones, we're going to look at two peculiar bones, which is the atlas and the axis. And these are the cervical bones C1 and C2. What makes them so peculiar is that they're different from the general structure we've spoken about, and we're going to see how in a minute. What usually helps me differentiate the atlas from the axis when naming them is remembering that in the alphabet, T comes before X. That means the atlas will be C1 and the axis will be C2. So if you look at the atlas, you notice that it does not have a vertebrate body. Instead, it has an articular surface of the dens, and I'm going to show you how they articulate together. And it has a transverse process, the transverse foramen, like the normal vertebrate bones that we know of, although the transverse processes and foramens are a bit different in shape. But you also notice that it does not have a spinous process. It has a very large vertebral foramen, and it's a very small bone. And one of the most unique features about it is it attaches to the base of the skull on the superior articular facets. So if we look at the axis, you note that the axis, unlike the atlas, the axis has a vertebrate body, but superiorly, its vertebrate body has got an odontoid process, or the dens that we mentioned when we were talking about the atlas, which articulates with the atlas, right? And then it also has a spinous process, which is something that the atlas does not have. Other than that, it has superior articular facets as well, but this superior articular facet does not attach to the base of the skull, but instead it attaches to the atlas. And these two bones form a joint together, which is called the atlantoaxal joint. So this joint allows the atlas to rotate around the dens area, and it rotates about 40 to 50 degrees. So you find this rotation important, especially when you're nodding yes, which is the movement where you move your head back and forth, or when you're rotating your head in circle. So this is allowed by the structure and the joint between the axis and the atlas. This is generally what the atlas and the axis look like when they're joined together. And as you can see, the articulation of the dens where the atlas and the axis fuse together, and also how the atlas sits on the axis on the superior facets, and also where the superior facets of the atlas are, which is where the base of the skull will be. And then also pay attention to the sulcus for the vertebrae artery, which is represented on this picture. It is important for you to note that in this video, I did not mention any ligament or muscles that attach to the vertebrate column, but you need to understand that they are ligaments that keep the joints between the vertebrate column together, and they're very important for stabilizing the vertebrate column and keeping it in shape, and also supporting the vertebrate column's functions. That's all I had for you today. Please like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends. It was fun. I love you guys. Bye.